Okay, can everybody now see the Vespa screen?
Yep. Yep.
Mhm.
Okay,
Yes. It might be good for everybody to mute themselves.
thank you. All right, this was a lot of fun to put together, guys. I have a long history with Vespa, going back to my late teens, early, about 19, 20 years old. And so we're going to start this journey with my first Vespa. Now, unfortunately, I could not find one that was the color of mine because mine was a custom paint job. Mine was orange. And from about 1972 to 1974, I had an orange 90cc Vespa that looked like this model you see before you. It was not my first two-wheeled vehicle. I actually had before that a Honda 160 that I used to use to go between San Diego and a girlfriend in Los Angeles, by back roads the whole way. It's a wonder I'm still on this planet. This had, there was no battery on this thing. So when the magneto / generator was running, the light was not, full RPM, the light would be nice and bright, and people could see me. Though it was incandescent. I definitely wore reflective clothing. So if you came up to a stoplight or idling, the incandescent bulb front and back got very dim. The on the right side, you had a place to control the throttle, and there was a kill switch, the brake lever, and a light switch and horn. If you go to the other side, this is where you shifted. And what you did is you squeezed that lever there that looks like a brake lever, and then rotated the whole assembly, and it got you into the next gear, of which there were 3 of them. And that went back through a cable mechanism to the shifting equipment right mounted next to the motor. Now, this may look like a really weird arrangement, but I can't tell you just how dependable not only was this mechanism, but the entire machine. The guy I bought it from, his name was Jerry. Jerry both owned the company, the little store that sold Vespas, the first Vespa dealer in San Diego downtown near the harbor. He was also the mechanic. And I took this picture of him in his shop talking to another owner. And it's one of my favorite photos. It was shot on film with a high-speed press film, and I did all the developing and printed it myself. So he was a real character. He thought that he was going to be making all his money from repairing the Vespas, but it proved that selling them was actually far more advantageous to him, because they were so dependable. He didn't have to, I don't know why it went back, but here we are. They were so dependable that he didn't make a lot of money on repairing them. So let's talk a little bit about the company's history. Rinaldo Piaggio started the company in 1884, and this was initially centered on producing locomotives and railway carriages. And the company basically grew fairly large. There we go. And then post-World War II, they got into supplying the military and also building seaplanes. I have no idea why this thing is having a hard time focusing. Okay, seaplanes. Now take a look at these things. We're talking about being on the Adriatic Sea. And one of the best ways to access a lot of the coastline was by having a seaplane coming into a harbor. So it was a great way to get around. The interesting thing is that this sort of fell into such use in folk culture that later on in the 1980s, Hayao Miyazaki made a film about the pilots that flew over the Adriatic post-World War I. It was called Poco Rosso, The Red Pig, and it is a very fun cartoon. And so just one of the Miyazaki loves planes, and so he took one of the designs and kind of souped it up. They also were building bombers. They started supplying bombers for Mussolini's effort during the entry of Italy into World War II. Unfortunately, this put them right at the center of the Allied bombing. And the Allies devastated their factory during the Italian campaign, leaving basically nothing for which that they could use to rebuild. The company was devastated. So this brings us to the birth of the Vespa itself. This is a story of coming up from the ashes. Enrico Piaggo was the son of one of the two sons of a founder, and he was an entrepreneur, very visionary about what the company could do, and quite resourceful. But we need to take a look at what the situation was post-World War II. There had been a tremendous loss of manufacturing materials shipped out to Germany. If you take a look at the history of Italy towards the end of World War II, Germany, seeing that Italy was a lost cause, basically at gunpoint took everything of value and shipped it up to Germany. Under the Marshall Fund and money from the US Army, Enrico Piaggo was able to get shipped back that which could be recovered. He also received from the Marshall Fund various loans and grants. And if anybody wants to think about one of the things that made America great, it was the treatment of our former enemies and Europe post-World War II. I think the vision of Marshall made an incredible difference in the world that we inherited.
Who is this?
So
Who is this?
who's got their mic on?
Okay.
So what material resources could they get back from Germany? Well, in big boxes, they were able to get back front wheel struts for airplanes, as shown here. They were able to get starter motors. These are two-stroke engines that were used to start larger motors on airplanes. Easily started with a pull cord, and a lot of the motors that on their bigger planes did not have electric starters. So you'd start up this little motor, and that little motor would be responsible for starting up the bigger motor. They also had a supply of front tires and a certain amount of sheet metal. Now, Italy's situation, being on the Allied, Axis cause, was that they had incurred tremendous debt, and inflation was running extremely high. So the money was not exactly worthless, but close enough. The roads were degraded. Forget trying to drive anywhere in a car. The amount of rubble, debris, destroyed bridges. Italy was a mess due to bombing, and also Germany ended up destroying a lot of the infrastructure as they retreated, so they could not be followed, and making it harder for the Allies. And the public was lacking jobs. Unemployment was extremely high. A lot of the wartime industries folded, but there was no money for reinvestment. The Marshall Fund was something that took about 2 years before it really started in earnest. So Enrico had been exposed to I don't know why it's doing this, but I'll try to stop it. Enrico had been exposed to the use by the Allied forces of the Cushman motor scooter. This is something that could be parachuted into the field, but it was not that comfortable a ride. Very utilitarian, a simple seat, and sometimes they put a trailer on the back for carrying a small amount of gear. But it was highly maneuverable and could go on roads that had been were in pretty bad shape, if not off trail. So this was a pretty versatile device. So Enrico realized that what Italy needed in a way, the Italians needed transportation, but they needed something that could handle the lack of infrastructure of the roads. It needed to be inexpensive, and it needed to be able to be readily mass produced. This was the first scooter. Enrico did not like it. One of the things he didn't like about it is, well, he says it looks like a duck. And it was actually laughingly called Donald Duck. Another thing is it had no step through. So if you were a young woman, you would find it very hard to do in a modest manner with your dress to step through. And he actually saw that it was that women were going to be one of the audiences that he'd be selling to. So he was not happy with this. So he turned to a gentleman he had collaborated with before, who was the designer of one of the first prototypes for a helicopter before the one we think about of Sikorsky. Carandreo Ascanio. Anybody good with their Italian? Maybe they can do a better job pronouncing his name. Now, this guy, this aircraft designer, hated motorcycles. So Enrico Piaggo basically said, well, if you hate motorcycles so much, why don't you take everything you hate about motorcycles and try to make a design that does an end run around all those things you don't like? And the design he came up with is the shape of the Vespa as we know it today. This is the one of the first drawings of it. Now notice that the earlier components that I had spoken about, oh, come on. I don't know why this thing is giving me so much grief here today. I am going to have to move quickly through, and hopefully it'll stay put. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, notice that each of the components here, the engine that they found, the two-stroke starter engines, ends up being used as the basis for the motor and then the additional transmission for the back wheel on the Vespa. The suspension system, instead of having a strut on a fork like a bicycle or motorcycle, notice that it's a single-sided arrangement. Now this does an end run with a axle that's not met on the other side by a fork. This makes it possible to readily prop up the front and change the tire. And the same was true about the back end. The designer felt that changing a tire on a motorcycle was a total bear, and he wanted something that people could readily do. So the kickstand, you put it up, you put a little weight up front, and it's not hard to change out this single-sided axle that does not have a fork. And I can tell you, having owned a few of these scooters, it's absolutely right. So now comes to the naming, Vespa. Well, the Piaggio took one look at it and immediately said it looked like a wasp. And hence the name wasp in Italian, Vespa equals wasp. And the name stuck. So manufacturing started in 1946. And in the first year, he sold 2,500 units. And Piaggio reinvested the money made from this to expand production so that he could meet what he thought was going to be a rising tide of interest in this. He also made it possible, because he is having a hard time getting loans, and people were hard time getting money to buy the Vespas.
Have your hearing aids in?
Yes.
Okay, turn that off.
No, bye. So he set up the first of installment plans so that people could go ahead and pay directly to the company in installments. And this boosted the ability of the company to ramp up production because the interest was there. And I found on the there's a site about the history of the company that allows you to look at some of these wonderful old archival photos. So here we have a picture of the early factory with an assembly line. And here we have the test bed where they started up the engine for the first time and checked that it would go up to enough RPMs and would be capable of speed, fine tuning, shifting, things of that nature. The Vespa had tremendous cultural impact. It saw a very quick and widespread adoption. And again, notice because the step through, this young lady is able to take this up. It became the family car. By the late 40s, early 50s, this is a rally of Vespas in Paris. That's downtown Paris you're looking at. So it became quite popular in Europe. But the one thing that was getting in the way of the growth of the company was that he was not really seeing a large export market beyond the continent. Interesting, about the same time, a new verb entered the Italian language, vespare, to go somewhere. So that's pretty cool when the name of your scooter ends up being used as a verb. 1953, Roman holiday, oops, back again. 1953, Roman holiday was created. The movie, if some of you have not seen it, is such a wonderful romantic comedy. The princess, played by Audrey Hepburn, who wants to escape the confines of the palace and have a fling. And she does so opposite Cary Grant. Most of it was shot around Rome and in the Sin City studios near Rome. I have here now a small clip from that movie. And remember, Audrey Hepburn is indeed doing her own stunts. I did some research on this, and it appears that she actually is the one driving the motor scooter.
Hey! Excuse me. Hey, stop! Come back, you leave me here. Let me take this. Let me take this. Il macello sono rovinato! Tutti con gomme riparteri, ragazzini, me li sto portati da tutto!
Well, you talk about product placement. With that film, it is estimated that 100,000 Vespas was sold based upon the advertising provided for free by Roman Holiday. How they ever got the Vespa to be featured in the film remains obscured in mythology. I could not find really how that happened, but there it is. It was featured front and center. You couldn't pay for that type of advertising nowadays. Now, in the early 60s, youth culture took off. And one of the ways that this is exemplified is in the mods of British, where they'd modify or trick out their Vespas. And you can see all the horns and lights they put on these vehicles. And they would cruise around at night into the wee hours, making quite the ruckus. You also have the production of various posters and calendars that found their way into people's garages, bedrooms, and you name it. The advertising campaign and the embrace of Vespa culture was big. So this is from a calendar. Keep in mind at the same time, Italian design was the thing, be it in fashion, furniture, this two-prong espresso maker. The Olvetti Valentine typewriter was a much sought after. And of course, the classic of classics, the Ferrari car. So if it was Italian, it was a hot item. And the Vespa fell into that larger context. So by 1996, the company had sold over 15 million units across all Vespas. This is also the year they introduced the first four-stroke model, the Vespa ET, as shown. So remember, up to that point, I had to, on my earlier model, I had to mix the oil and gas, and there was a little cup that I kept underneath the seat and some two-stroke oil. And after topping up the vehicle, I would have to put in the metered amount of oil. So my last Vespa was a GTS in 2006. I was living in St. Louis at the time. This was a 250cc water-cooled four-stroke engine. It had a continuous variable transmission. That means you turn the throttle and it went up to about 70 miles per hour without a single shift as you know it. So it had used two discs that would change the ratio between how fast the engine was spinning over and how fast the back end was spinning over. Smooth as can be. And with that muffling system, it was quite quiet. It also had disc brakes. And when eventually I moved about 11 years ago to Ithaca, I found at that point that it was very difficult to find a mechanic for this. And at the same time, I also lost a dear friend that I had worked with in Chicago to a motorcycle accident in which she was killed instantly. She was a very experienced rider, but I found after that accident of my dear friend and colleague that it was very difficult for me to relax on the Vespa, relax to the point that I was actually getting in the way of good driving because I was too cautious, too wound up, you might say. So at that point, I sold it to a local fellow. This is me when I bought it, stretching out, relaxing on my Vespa. And the reason I could lay back like that, there's nice cushion because of the little helmet carrier on the back of it. Great fun to ride. I used it to commute to work from the suburbs at the two different jobs I had during that period. Vespas continued to innovate. This is the electric version, which is rechargeable. It's in a sort of a scoot about town version with a top speed of 45 miles per hour and a fairly limited range, but it does get some of that power back through regenerative braking. This was brought on the market in 2018. So I've had a great run with Vespa. I continue to love the machine, love the model, love the story. There is a fun fictional account of Enrico Piaggio's journey called Enrico Piaggo, An Italian Dream. It is on Amazon Prime if you pay for a particular one of those special services. The book that I found most having a bit of everything without costing an arm and a leg is Vespa, Style and Passion. And this book is still available. All right, and that's it. Questions? Anybody want to unmute? We're back on here.
Yeah, Mark, what you'd never mentioned which city the Piaggio's factory was located in.
It's Ponticeria is the name of it. Ponticeria. Again,
Near where?
I think it's near Milan.
Oh,
But-
okay, makes
but
sense. Yeah.
I'm not sure on that count. Yeah, it's Ponticeria, something like that. I think it's
Now-
about yeah.
Yeah, my daughter went and bought, I'm pretty sure she had a Vespa in Hawaii and emphasized the fact that it was the real item and not an Indian knockoff.
That's right. India did some. They were distributing in India for quite a while, and ended up, shall we say, eventually doing something that we would consider illegal on copyright and started making their own under their own name without a license. So yes, saying that it's not an Indian knockoff, that was. I think that's a good thing to make note of. There's another resource. It's not really a resource. It's just one damn fun book that's called Vroom with a View. Not Room with a View. That's Vroom with a View. And it's told from the standpoint of a 40-year-old British fellow who finds that he's having that midlife crisis and realized that all the things that he thought he was going to do, he has not done. And one of them was drive a Vespa from one end of Italy to the other. So he found a Vespa that was built or manufactured the same year he was born. Had a guy rebuild it for him, and he drove from one end of Italy to the other and wrote about it in Vroom with a View.
Yeah.
Love it.
Good book.
Mark,
Yes.
Jim Persanti here. With the suspension arrangement in the front of the Vespa, was there a tendency for a wheel bearing on the weighted side to wear as opposed to the other side?
You know, it's a good question. From an engineering standpoint, I could see that might be possible. I never had any trouble with it, nor heard of anybody having trouble with that. The only thing that's kind of weird over a motorcycle is it has to do with that when you're steering it and you're at low speed, there is a little bit of flakiness in the front. It's a little bit, the steering on it is just a little odd at low speed, especially if you're in a bumpy area and you have the wheel, you have it turned.
Right.
Something about that axle would create a little weird distribution, but it even as soon as you got going, it evened out. The gyroscopic force of the wheels would pretty much get rid of all the squirreliness at very, very low speeds. Yeah. Bud, did you have a question?
I had around 1980 a Piaggio moped, and I wondered if in your investigation there might be. It sounds like there must be a correlation.
Oh yeah, the one thing I didn't cover about the company just because of time constraints is the number of various parts of the company that still exist or broke, that split off and or manufactured various things. Man, they had a car, they had a three-wheeled little sort of utility vehicle called the APE, the APE,
Yes.
or app. So they kept there's an aviation division that is still I think a going concern. So yes, if it says Piaggio, you can count on it. It was made by the same people that made the Vespa.
Mark.
It was
Yes.
fun.
Oh, thank you.
Mark,
Yes. Yes, Ed?
I was in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam a couple of years ago, and the streets were absolutely loaded with small motorbikes, including several Vespas.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Mark,
Let-
did
let-
the,
Let's wrap it up after this question because we've got a birthday boy here who we want to celebrate.
okay, good.
Peter, your question.
Quick question then. At the time, I remember Vespa being paired with Lambretta. There were two different scooters. Do you know anything about the Lambretta?
I think at some point, yes, there was the two companies, and I think Vespa eventually absorbed them, but I may be confused as to what company they absorbed because there was another scooter company that eventually Vespa did absorb, but I'm not sure if it was that company. I
They
remember.
look very similar, except the Vespa had these bulges on the rear, each side of
Right.
the wheel, and the Lambretta did not.
Yes.
How you could
Yes.
tell the difference.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much.
Well
Well
done.
done. Nice, Mark.
Thank you,
Thank you, Mark.
Wonderful.